going to begin recording. I'm going to do the brachas, and Art, I'm very pleased you do better, honestly, mate. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'suk b'divrei Torah. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu divrei Torah b'finu b'cha beit Yisrael v'niyeh anachnu v'tze'etzenu v'tze'etzei b'cha beit Yisrael kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei toratecha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai hem lomei Torah le'amo Yisrael.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'chabanu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu torato. Baruch atah Notenu Torah. I hope Hashem blesses our learning today. And we're just going to start off with a quick concept of the Mishnah Brura where we ended off yesterday. So basically we were just talking about the Rambam for the 10 days of repentance, the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. Basically, we looked at the Rambam's point of view. Rabbi Shmuel Eliezer Idelus, who's known as the Maharsha, he's from 1555 to 1631. The person who the shul is named after, Maharsha, explains that our fate for the coming year is decided on Rosh Hashanah, but it's not sealed on Yom Kippur. Accordingly, this time is to beg God to return the judgment for the better. And then in terms of the prayers, there's a number of tweaks that are made to the daily prayer that you need to watch out for. So basically, we say Psalm 130, 3 times a day in the Amidah, we substitute the phrases Hakel HaKadosh, the Holy King, for Melech HaKadosh, the Holy King. So, the Holy God to the Holy King. And then Melech Ohev Tzedakah Mishpat, King who loves righteousness and justice. That's also there, as well as Melech HaMishpat, the King of Judgment. There are a number of other insertions that were inserted by medieval sages that can be in the prayer book. Now, if you have a look in your art scroll, what you'll find is that, there's subsequent prayers that are also added, like the Tachanun and Avinu Malkeinu prayers there. But some of this we started during the month of Elul, and we'll do until the 7th day of Sukkot, because we say that obviously Hashem looks at every opportunity to give us a new chance. We say Psalm 27 in the morning, in the afternoons, etc. So just one thing I wanted to mention before we go to the Gemara share is I was thinking a little bit about this with regards to Rosh Hashanah, is that sometimes your life doesn't change from one day to the next. It's not like there wasn't coronavirus and then there is. Well, it's not like you're in a healthier mindset. It's not like somebody can tell you, well, just behave now, because you weren't behaving and now all of a sudden you can behave a little bit better. So I've always had this bit of a issue that it's difficult to, just like when somebody else says feel better, you feel automatically better. But I tell you what, I was thinking about an interesting concept about how we actually can control our emotions. And with this, we'll start at the shir. I don't know if you've ever seen. I mean, generally, if you're arguing with somebody, whether it's a spouse or one of your children or somebody that's just irritating you, and they're arguing with you, and the minute you two are in an argument and somebody rings the doorbell and you see a stranger bringing you cake from next door, like somebody decided to just drop off a gift for Rosh Hashanah, you go from an immediate state of irritation to, hi, how are you? I haven't seen you in a long time, which means we're capable under the right circumstances of quick change. You just obviously have to have what you call a state break, as Anthony Robbins calls it.
Yeah. You're 100% right. When I was a kid, I'd be feeling sick as a dog, and one of my mates would come around, either you or Warren or whatever, and suddenly I'm all fine suddenly.
Yeah. Sometimes
miraculous.
Exactly, and even a change of environment, like when I was in a Mamson Toti, it does help. But if you're not feeling the mindset of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, don't feel despondent. I think the end of the day is Hashem, as a father, we use the word Avinu Malkeinu. He's not just a judge and king, but he's also our father, and he does want us to feel better. He doesn't want us to have miserable lives. Obviously our behavior determines the sort of reaction we get from people. I mean, that's a given. And the bigger problem is how we feel internally. because how we process a day, you could be living a heaven or hell. It's in your mind. I promise you, it's in your mind. You must let me know how to feel heaven one day in my mind. Sometimes it's average and sometimes it's not great.
You know that. You always call me and say, nothing's come in, and then the phone rings.
Exactly. But that's from a marketing point of view because you're a marketing genius. But that's a different issue. So we're going to get started with the Gemara Shir. I'll tell you where we ended off. And we were at 17. We actually made a lot of progress yesterday, guys. We went from 17A3 to 17B2. Now, so that's quite a bit. So we actually flew through it. Stephen, I don't know if you managed to listen to the shir. Were you able to at all?
Not all of it. Half of it, about past 8, yeah.
Okay, so listen, whatever you can do, you can do. I know you had load shedding. It's lovely to have you here.
Yeah, I just saw that.
Bright and bushy-tailed. I really appreciate that. Yeah. So all we did is when you've that's no problem. When you've got a bit of a chance, you could read the page or two. I'll just upload it, etc. But it's very, very straightforward.
Okay.
So all we did, I can tell you in a 3-minute recap, because if you can't recap in 3 minutes, you don't know the daf. So all I'm recapping is as follows, is that we just wanted to understand where it said regarding what is the foot of the animal muad, and it seemed repetitive. And we said that the word foot applied to the av, which was the actual regal part. And the animal part applies to its body or the backpack that it's got on, or anything of the animal's body that does damage in the natural walking. So whether it's the actual primary case of Av or Tordos, the subcategories, either one does damage, they were referring to both the Av and the Tordos. You are responsible for full payment. And then took a case in 19B, 19B, where it took the case of Shane, and it said the word Shane in that particular area seemed a little bit redundant as well. It mentioned the animal, obviously, how do I put it? The animal is eating, and then it explained again that the animal is eating, and it's saying that, well, what was the case here? We don't quite understand why that was brought. And the reality is it was brought to teach you two different things. It said, what did it say again? It said the truth of the animal is more to eat what is appropriate for it. An animal is more to eat fruit and vegetables. So it sounded like a repeat, but basically the discussion between Ravina and Rava was that this tooth wasn't repetitive, because the first tooth talked about a chaya, a wild animal, and the second tooth talked about a behema, a domesticated animal. Now, Stephen, we're talking about a wild animal when somebody keeps a wild animal as a pet. If you think about it, even today, when you keep American pit bulls, you must be insane if you have small children to keep them, because they are wild animals. So those nature of certain animals are carnivoristic. They're carnivores, they eat meat, and some are herbivores, they eat vegetables. So when we talk about a chaya, we generally talk about a wild animal that's a meat eater, and that's why the first verse talks about eating what is appropriate for it, meaning, meat, etc. When we're talking about the second verse, an animal is more to eat fruit and vegetables, we're talking about a herbivore animal and a behema. So there we're saying we're coming to understand that the pasuk might have come to the conclusion with the pasuk that all we had to learn is that our domesticated animals like the oxen, the sheep, and etc. are covered, but actually even wild animals are covered, and that's the repetition for the word shame, right? So once we discussed it, it says, okay, one more thing I don't understand. Why did you mention the wild animals before the domesticated animals in the Mishnah? Because in the Pasha, it actually discusses the case of domesticated animals. Why don't you mention what was mentioned in the Pasha first? Because we generally do that. And they said this exposition that the Tana came out with in terms of this novelty is something that was more dear to him, and we taught it first. And then we said, but then generally we have a case where we teach the Torah portion first. And we're saying it's only a case. And it brings us as a question that says, but then the same could be said of regal. Why didn't you teach the Tordos before the Av. And I turned around and said, listen, you can't teach toldos before Av. You can never logically teach a subcategories before the primary category. It makes no logical sense. And the reason why you had to mention the Pasha first as a first resource is an Av. We get the Av because that's the scriptural source. That's the historical basis. And then the toldos are the mentally extrapolated operating principles at which the behavior of the animal mimics the Av. The toldos, of which there's full payment required, both with the Av and the toldos. But we're saying with the case of a Shane, they're both Av. So they're both scriptural source. The one is just inferred and the one is a given. But because they're both an Av, it doesn't matter what order you mention it in. So that's how that's what we covered yesterday. I hope I did okay in a couple of minutes giving it over to you guys.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. Yeah.
All right. But I've got something stuck in my throat. All right. So now we're going to go to the next portion. Somebody's phone is tweaking, which is cool.
Yeah, sorry. Let me just switch. I'll mute myself. It's not my phone. It's just messages coming through on the WhatsApp.
Okay, it means you're important. Nobody phones me because I'm not as important. So that's cool, man.
Sorry.
If you need to get an SMS or WhatsApp, I don't want you to turn off your phone, Mark, but you've got business to attend to. I understand. Same with you.
It's not important. It's not important.
All right. So now it's going into this next case, and we're on 17b2. And let's just see. Oh, there was one other alternative answer. One of the reasons it began with the foot, the Av, is because on 15 stuff, it ended with the discussion of the Av. So it's almost a conclusion to that chapter. That's an alternative answer that's given. Now, the Gemara is going to cite a brisa that expands on what was taught in the Mishnah. Okay? The rabbis taught in a brisa an animal is allowed to walk normally and break utensils that are in its path. How so? If an animal entered into the yard of the damaged party, and the damage with her body in the course of her walking, or with her hair in the course of her walking, or with the saddle that is on her, with the pack that is on her, or with the bit that is in her mouth, or that the bell that is tied around her neck, or if the donkey did it with its load. So what I wanted to explain to you is from Gavin's original chart that he gave us, which I'm just going to zoom in a second. I'm just going to share my screen and then show you what it's about. Just give me 1 second, guys. Gavin's famous chart, which I liked. He did it very well. All right. Now, guys, if you have a look here, okay, this is the foot. So the regel, which is the Av, is the normal foot movement, but bodily movement is all the toldos, which means the toldos is caused by the animal's natural movement. But the main four are not these two. This is just kind of a repeat. It's the animal's hair that latches onto something and like pulls something over. That's like a yak. An animal's backpack loaded with goods, an animal's bit in her mouth to steer, and a bell around her neck. So anything that's part of an animal that causes damage in the animal's natural movement is a torda. Okay? So that's what the Gemara is talking about there. And just hang on a second. It refers to the animal as a herd because just naturally the female animals were workhorses and the male animals were used A, for breeding, and B, in cases and examples of goring, if that makes any sense. All right, so why is it mentioning here something interesting? Tosfot brings that it mentions the case of a donkey. We haven't heard that expression before. In terms of the donkey's context, the pack that is on the donkey's back is because generally with an animal, another sort of animal, you tie a pack very tightly on an animal, which means it's almost regarded as part of the body. But because customarily a donkey is used to a heavy load and you load it up quite big and the pack isn't, as tight, and it can be piled quite high because donkeys can take a lot of weight. and they used, what do you call it, as suitcase packing. People didn't always only ride donkeys. You might have thought there, if a huge pile of luggage that was on a donkey knocked something, that you wouldn't be responsible. It's saying here that if it's part of an animal, you certainly are responsible. And we're going to come to see later on the daf, we're even talking about a case where a wagon is attached to an animal. Why? Because if a wagon is attached to an animal, it still moves along with the animal. But we're going to hit that in one of the later dafs. All right, so let's just cover a little bit of ground here. Now, so far it all makes sense. We've learned about avs and tordos, and we're saying with any sort of regal damage, both the av and the tordos, you pay full damages. But just remember in the beginning of this daf, it says, if an animal entered into the yard of the damaged party. Why? Because you're not responsible for shayne and regal damage in the public domain. Because it uses the term in the biblical verse, if he shall send forth in the field of another, which implies it has to be in somebody else's field that it damaged, but in the public domain it's exempt. Now I'm just telling Stephen for his benefit. That's why it actually...
Yeah, damage and regal. The tooth, the regal and the shayne. The foot and the tooth, isn't it?
Tooth is shayne and regal is movement. Yeah, it's the foot. It's movement. So why it says damaged in the part in the field of another is because you're only responsible for full payment if that occurs. But in the public domain, your animal is allowed to go, and therefore you're not responsible because there's many animals there. You're only responsible for carrying damage. All right. So we're going to go through now what it says, and this is the part of the Chiddush. Sumchus says, if the damage was done through pebbles sent flying by the animal, or if a hog was rooting around in the trash pile and it did damage, the animal pays full damages. Okay? So the Gemara questions the end of Sumchus' statement. Does he mean that the hog that did damage by rooting around in the trash pile? But then it's obvious that the owner must pay full damages, as this is a regular case of an animal doing damage with its body. Why would Sumchus have to teach us this? So the Gemara answers, rather you must say that Sumchus means if the hog made pebbles fly with its snout and thereby did damage, the hog's owner pays full damages. So what it's saying there is Sumchus would never have to mention, Sumchus is one of the great rabbis mentioned in the Gemara, and he's not talking about a case where the animal rolls around and does damage with its body, because that's a normal case of regal. It's saying that often a pig uses its snout to forage for food, etc., and it's got a habit of going, and when it does that, stuff flies out of its nose that can either soil garments or it can actually cause damage like pebbles. And in this case, the owner pays full damages. Now, something's wrong here, guys. What's something wrong? If we want to say it's the body and Sumchus says pays full damages, fine. But what's this case of if it's coming out of its snout, what does that resemble?
Saurus.
Exactly. Exactly. So what's the novelty here, what we learn about Sumchus? What does Sumchus say we pay for damages?
Yeah, we should be paying half damages.
Exactly. Someone's awake this morning. Excellent, excellent. So that's exactly the case. That for Troros, Sumchus seems to imply that we pay full damages. And we don't actually understand why this is the case. Okay? So the Gemara seeks to understand the connection between Sumchus and the statement of the Tana Kamma. Now remember, what is the Tana Kamma, guys?
The first opinion, huh?
Yeah, it's generally an anonymous Mishnah of the first opinion. Stephen, you also took your white pause this morning. That's awesome. You can hear Stephen has done a lot of learning. So that's exactly what the Tana Kamma is. It's the anonymous, generally first opinion of the Gemara. So what's happening here is the Brisa presents Sumchus as if he disputes the Tana Kamma. Okay, so hang on, there's a cat here. But the Tana Kamma has not said anything related to Sumchus's case. So we want to understand that if they're not disputing, what is it talking about here? So the Gemara answers, it's as if the Brisa is deficient in how it should be read. After stating, or a donkey with its load, he pays full damages, the Tana Kamma added, but if the animal did damage by making pebbles fly in the normal course of activity, then the owner pays only half damages. And similarly, if a hog was rooting around in the trash pile and it made pebbles fly with its snout and thereby did damage, he, the hog's owner, pays only half the damage. So now we can understand what Sumchus is talking about, exactly as Michael said. It's as if Michael predicted it. And the reason being is it sounded like when the initial wording was in the Gemara, it wasn't specific. All it said in the original case of the Bryce, it said if a hog was rooting around in the trash pile and it did damage, and we assume that it was a normal case of regal, he pays full damages. But here it's saying that the Bryce needs to be tweaked a bit and reread so that basically if pebbles fly out of the animal's snout after the animal is rooting out in the trash and thereby did damage, the hog owner only pays half damages. So accordingly, the Bryce as we have it is basically going to show that Sumchus does disagree. But at least now we know that the case is of one, as Michael said, Sroros. So Sumchus, however, said if an animal sent pebbles flying, both like, for example, a horse that galloped where the stones were flying, or if a hog was rooting around in the trash pile and made pebbles fly and did damage, the animal's owner pays full damages. Okay, so now the Gemara now presents another brisa that records the dispute between the Tana Kamma and Sumchus concerning choros. So the rabbis taught in a brisa, this is the second brisa, if chickens were fluttering from place to place and they broke utensils with their wings, in other words, they struck utensils with their wings, breaking the utensils, the owner pays full damages because that is what you call direct contact damage. If they broke the utensils with the wind of their wings, in other words, the wind generated by the flapping of the wings, the owner of the chickens pay only half damages. Sumchus, however, says in either case, the owner pays full damages. Okay. So there's a third brisa that brings a dispute. I'm going to just put you guys on mute because I'm hearing a bit of ruffling. You can ask a question and unmute yourself.
So.
Just hang on.
Okay.
Michael, what did you say? I muted you as you had a question. Apologies.
So is Sumchus saying that it's not a case of Taurus, those two things?
Great question. Okay, so Michael is saying, what does Sumchus believe? Does he hold Baltsaurus? Does he say it's full damages? Does he say there's even such a thing? So we're going to discuss what is his actual disagreement. Does he acknowledge there is a law from Moshe HaSinai? Did he learn differently in his Masorah? Or why does he hold full damages? Or is it a case of he's got a different reason? So exactly that. We're going to address it now. So far we've seen two brises. The primary brisa was talking about the case of that if a hog moves around in the trash, the rabbis turn around and say the Tana Kamma, which is the opinion of the rabbis, turns around and says if something flies out of its snout, it's Shoros half damages. Sumchus says full damages. It now brings another case, another brisa between the Tana Kamma and Sumchus, which says, okay, so chickens were flapping around. If the wings smacked something, full damages. That's a classic case of regal damage with bodily movement. If it's from the wind generated from the force of its wings flapping, the rabbis, which is the Tana Kamma, the first opinion, and the rabbis agree that it's Shoros half damages, and Sumchus said it's full damages. Okay? Now he's reading a third brisa. It was taught in another brisa if chickens were hopping on a dough or on fruits. What do we mean a dough? We are talking about a dough, like for example, in the old days, what actually happened is that women, in order to let their dough rise, would keep it by the windowsill. So he's saying if chickens messed up the dough for the bread or on fruits and they soiled it In other words, they obviously defecated or urinated on it, or they picked at the food, damaging them. The owner of the chickens must pay food damages. If they didn't damage the food directly, but rather stirred up sand or pebbles that damaged force, in other words, from their wind, and some grains of sand or dust went on the food, which is obviously ruined, then the owner of the chickens need pay only half damage. It's half damage. But Sumchus, even in this case, says either case the owner pays full damage. Now, there's another brisa. So this other brisa said, if a chicken was fluttering from place to place and a gust of air came forth from under its wings and broke utensils, in other words, say that people had a flower pot on their ledge, and it's a small ledge, and this chicken came, and that sheer force of the wind knocked it over, but there was no bodily contact. The chicken's owner pays only half damage, and here we have an unattributed brisa in accordance with the rabbis. So now the Gemara analyzes the dispute between the rabbis and Sumchus, and we're going to answer Marco's question. Rava said, actually the view of Sumchus is quite understandable, right? For he holds that one's force is like his body. But what do the rabbis hold? They hold that one's force is like its body, then the owner should have to pay the entire damage for troros. And if they hold that one's force is not like his body, then in the case of troros, the owner should not have to pay the half damage either. Now, guys, I want you to explain this back to me to see if it makes sense to you. Guys, unmute yourself. Guys,
Yeah.
asking you a question. Explain what I've just explained to you.
Gavin?
Let me just.
Somebody else? No, I've got a sense, but I wouldn't say I'm clear.
Okay, so what do you understand it to be?
So basically, in essence, if in a normal case, if it's the body or it's the foot, everyone agrees that it's full damages. If there's cause for if there's a type of damage where there's a force in between and it's not direct bodily contact, then you assume it's a case of tsoros. Okay, like the flapping of the wings and the wind generated by it, it's not direct contact, and all the other examples. But Simcha says that for all these cases, it's full damages.
Yeah, so Sumchus, what's his reasoning? We've just addressed your question. What's his reasoning?
Well, to him, it's I've probably got the wrong answer now, but to him, it's like it would seem like it's part of the body. It's connected to the body. It's indirect force.
Yes, so Marco understood correctly in that it's saying Sumchus's view is, look, whether it was generated by a body or a body's force, it shouldn't be any different. Why shouldn't it be any different? Guys, let's take the case of Maveh with man. Okay? Yeah. I actually take a bat directly in my hands and I break a window. Fine. That's direct contact from me to the bat to the window. Glass. Total direct contact. That is directly me. There's no separate, or let's make it bigger. Let's take the bat away. I punch through the glass. That's me directly. If I pick a pebble and I throw it through the glass, that's my force. So Sumchus said, what difference does it make if it's your force or if it's you? You should pay full damages. So the rabbis, so the discussion is as follows, is that Rava said that basically if your force is like your body, you should pay full damages. If your force and your body halachically is disconnected, then you shouldn't have to pay anything. We don't understand why you should pay half damages. Does that make sense?
So Simchus is basically a non-believer of Tzoros. I mean, in effect, he's
Yeah, so
a non-believer.
Exactly. So we're going to find out what his view is on that. Exactly. So we're going to find out what his view is on that. So basically, he said you should either pay everything. In other words, if there's a connection between a force and a body directly, you pay everything or you pay nothing. There's either no connection at which you pay nothing, or if there is a connection because your force did damage and it's like the person, pay everything. So Rava then resolved this problem and he raised it and said, actually the rabbis hold that one's force is like his body. Interestingly enough, the rights of the owner that he should actually pay full damages for tzoros. Even the rabbis agree with him conceptually. This is what you've got to remember. It's not that Sumchus is trying to be difficult. The rabbis in principle agree with him that your force, whether it's your body or indirect, if you caused it, you should pay full damages. And
it's like one unit.
Like one unit,
whole
exactly. Unit. And basically, it's the only reason you pay half damages for pebbles flying, for example, is the halacha lemoshe mesina that the rabbis have received as part of the oral tradition. So it's saying exactly that the only reasons that the rabbis would turn around and say you should pay half damages for this is because of the of this rule. So so that's quite an interesting take. Now there is a slightly different opinion. The Rosh in 19a insists that there couldn't have been a viable alternative because he said it takes it for a given that the halacha lemoshe mesina tzoros came to reduce the owner's liability. It's not come to increase it. So if the Gemara was here to say that the rabbis equated one's force with one's body and the owner would have to pay full damages, if it wasn't for the halacha lemoshe mesina that reduces his liability to half damages, so they're both actually saying the same thing, that you should pay full damages. It's only because of this. So are you probably saying how does Sumchus hold in terms of?
I'm just saying. So the Moshe and the law from Mount Sinai is basically just a leniency. It's just basically a leniency. So it's not a question of attacking the whole thing about Soros.
Yeah,
it's just a leniency. And even if it's so even if it's rabbis are arguing whether it's directly related to one's body or not directly related to one's body, doesn't really matter here. If it is a force, that, yes, according to the rabbi, it's full damages, but Mount Sinai law says, if it's indirect contact, we'll give you a leniency. And
that's exactly it. So what he says, actually, ostensibly, the rabbis agree with Sumchus, or Sumchus agrees with the rabbis, that your force should be no different to your actual direct damage. You've damaged, and therefore you should pay full payment. And the halacha lemoshe mesina is coming to say there's a leniency, exactly that. So we want to know now what Sumchus actually deals with regards to what his view is on this law from Moshe, from Har Sinai. Now, another statement by Rava related to the laws of Tzoros, and it's going to answer the question in this way. Rava said, whatever type of contact makes a tameh object, in the case of a zav, in the case of damages, makes the animal's owner liable to pay full damages. So I'm going to explain this now. Whatever type of contact leaves an object tahor in the case of zav, in the case of damages, makes the animal's owner liable to pay half the damage. Let's just see how long we've got. We've got 2.5 minutes. So guys, it's bringing this case here where we think it's completely unrelated. What are we talking about a zav here? So a zav is a special type of seminal emission by an adult human male, and it renders something that touches it tuma. And something...
Tameh.
Yeah, Kevin, you and I have gone through this argument before. One's the adjective and one's the noun. We both right. Because every time you correct it, we both right. It depends if you're talking the adjective or the noun. It's not a singular or plural. So Kevin is right. but I was talking about in the noun, not the adjective. Okay. So Kevin's awake. He won't let you get away with the thing. That's why I've got to be so careful with my wording. So all we're saying here is the rules of direct and indirect. We're learning this principle from the case of a Zav. So if a Zav made something tameh or tumah, whatever you want to say, and it made it spiritually impure, it's made it spiritually impure by the contact that it's had with that direct object. And what we're saying is, if basically somebody that's in a state of ritual impurity, that they touched a mace or the Zav, and they threw a tennis ball at something, that object doesn't become tameh. It actually remains tahor. It remains pure. So we're seeing here that indirect touching does not infect an object. And we're going to come next year to figure what does the story with the Zav have to do with direct damage and indirect damage. The Zav isn't talking about damage. It's talking about indirect touch and direct touch in terms of level of affection of spiritual impurity. And we're going to come to see Sumkus' point of view next time, the Bava Kamma and the rabbis. But we're going to have to use this particular learning of Zav, Tahor and Tameh, in order to achieve this. Thanks, guys. I hope you have a good day. Thanks. Cheers. Kevin, well done. You're awake. Cheers, guys.
Good.